This is the Fair Fight Initiative podcast. I'm Linda Franks, the Executive Director of the Fair Fight Initiative in Baton Rouge.
And I'm Dave Cartoonen of the Fair Fight Initiative in Boston.
Welcome back, Dave.
Why, thank you, Linda. It's good to be back.
It has been
we got a new format.
Yes, we do, and I'm totally excited about it. I love giving people, just a straight, no chaser type of information and inciting conversation and discussion. And I think that this new format is going to be really, really amenable to that. I think people.
And that's not to say that we don't want great guests. Mm-hmm. We're always, and certainly to check back in with the wonderful guests that we've had going forward in the future. But this is the summer brew.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And what a brew we have brewing, huh, Dave?
Well, I look forward to the day when we don't have a brew. That means we've been successful.
From your mouth to God's ears. So, Dave, stop me if you've heard this before. Because I don't think you've heard this before since in the 1700s, right? Okay. I'm just
It's about right. That's about right.
So,
I was there.
The unfolding saga, which is the January 6th insurrection and the hearings and all of the details, the tidbits that are coming out that really show that, oh my God, we definitely had an insurrection and a plot to really overthrow our democratic process here in the United States of America.
This was not just a bunch of angry guys with bear spray who decided to go break stuff.
Exactly.
There was a plan.
Yeah. And I don't understand how people did not realize that from the beginning, but there are those of us sometimes that just really need to be inundated with, if we will receive it, the facts, so to speak, of the case, right? I cannot believe some of the testimony that I am hearing, in particular, just to what lengths the corroboration there was between some of these groups, and some of our officials in higher government. It's just amazing.
And when you don't think that the January 6 hearings have to do with our broken system of criminal justice and systemic racism, Linda, I have two questions for you. What would have happened if the insurrectionists were black or brown?
I can tell you one thing that I do know. There would have been casualties. Quite a few people would have been killed on that day trying to get into the Capitol. I think,
yeah. And I think on top of that, the level of preparation that would have gone into that day,
yes.
Right? Oh, there's the potential that black and brown people might be protesting out in front of the Capitol. They would have come out with the tanks.
Come on.
Right? The tanks would have been out there. The army would have been out there. It was like when, President Trump tried to get the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, to clear the streets with the army.
Yeah, for the
right?
photo op with the Bible, right? Yeah.
Yes. So here's the second question I have for you. This isn't just systemic racism from a color of a skin perspective, but there's another sort of systemic sexism that is on display in this case. And my second question for you is, why is it that only women have to speak truth to power and testify in these hearings? Of course, there have been male witnesses. However, the people closest to the action, the only people that seem to be brave enough in this case to come forward and say what they saw have been women.
I'm going to answer this from a mother's point of view. I'm just going to come straight at you. When we think about safety and when we think about integrity, we're thinking about how does it affect not only our children, but the world that they're going to have to live in. And we would move mountains to make sure that our children, that the people we love, live in a better place. And I don't know if that's just the way God made us, nurturers, our wounds, we carry you people in our bodies, right? That we feel that it is our obligation to speak up and to speak out and to put ourselves out there. These women are amazing who have been coming forward. And I'm proud of my gender when you put it that way, Dave, because what would keep you from wanting to preserve this democracy at all costs. You took oaths to be able, to guard and protect the Constitution of uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, and then you're holding back on what you know. So yeah, mothers, you're messing with our cubs, honey. You're messing with the very concept of what our lives are, and when you do that, women, we come out fighting and scratching.
I certainly think it starts there, but then I look at every other civilized country where democracy seems to be working well, and people are held accountable, right? Yeah. And the most interesting thing that I read about this phenomenon is that, like, the only social safety net in the United States these days seems to be women, and that had to do with what we expect from women for childcare, what we expect from women to leave their jobs to take care of children, what we expect from women to fix things, and in this case, the fixing the thing is our entire democracy. While somebody like, I'll point out two people as a contrast. Pat Cipollone, who was the White House counsel in this case, who had to be dragged kicking and screaming after this bombshell testimony to come say part of what he knows, but he still uses this flimsy privilege excuse where he's like, I can't talk about what I talked with President Trump about, but then he freely talks about what he talked to other White House staffers about when he was the White House lawyer. So he's undermined his own sort of privilege claim when he does that. And it's like, everyone's like, oh, well, we have to be nice to him because he's a white man in power. And, that's very delicate. We must, have some real institutional comedy here where everyone gets along and we value that. And then the second person, the more egregious example, is Donald Trump appeared to have an 8-point plan to overthrow the government, which ended with unleashing a mob to hang Mike Pence.
Come on, man.
And yet Mike Pence still sees no need to come in and testify to what he knows. And worse, the entire sort of political community, the media, the opposing politicians, the people in the community are like, oh yeah, I guess that's probably okay if the person who, was the target of a hanging doesn't need to come in and talk about it because, he's white and powerful, so, we have different rules.
Let's not forget Mark Meadows, right? I mean, where is he in this drama, right? He actually allegedly had a conversation saying, come get your folk. Hey, come get your people. They out here about to tear up the Capitol, right? Call them down. But of course, no,
Linda, we must remain civil. These are white men in power, so we must remain civil.
I can imagine.
Everyone be nice.
I can imagine what that scene would have looked like you said, in preparation for my brothers and sisters of color coming out to protest the systemic racism that we've had to deal with since the inception of the this country. The National Guard would have already been deployed. There, like you said, tanks and armor and riot gear, and the first person to have broken through a barricade would have been shot dead, not coming, and God rest her soul, and I mean no disrespect, not coming through a window on the inside of the Capitol, but definitely before you ever even got on the steps, let alone to be able to raise a gallows.
The flimsy barricade that was in place, right? Over that flimsy barricade that was in place, the only preparation that they had made for the day, right? All right, Linda, well, stop me if you've heard this one before, but we have the tale of Sam Dobbins, the now former police chief of Lexington, Mississippi. A stunning but not surprising article in the Washington Post, which we'll link to on fairfightinitiative.org/podcast. Sam Dobbins is caught on audio recording by a black subordinate who was a sworn police officer admitting to killing 13 people in the line of duty, bragging about it, including one case where he bragged about shooting a man more than 100 times.
Mississippi. I think it was Nina Simone that coined it better than anybody else. Damn, God damn Mississippi. But to me, it resonates on so many different levels. For one, you have this black man who is, going to work in this police department and realizes, I can't do this. The culture here is just too toxic for me. I can't do this. But before I leave, I'm going to do my best to make sure that this person is no longer in power. And if he is, there are going to be some serious questions as to why. According to the article, Mississippi has a one consent rule for recording. So this young man, recorded this conversation, and now this police chief has been terminated. I mean, but this is the thing, and I can't stress this enough, is that in my life, in my culture, this is not, I don't want to say it's not news to me. No. Yeah. Okay?
I understand.
When we think of the strong arm of the law, we think of these people who are in these small rural areas, these sheriffs, these police that have immunity. They can kill without any type of worry of retribution. It's in the line of duty. It's, they can target Black bodies all day long. And from the reports, this young man that he's talking about shooting 119 times was not even armed, right? But then he was so quick to say how, I got off on it. Because they are going to believe what the officer says. And so I think it's time for our country to start looking at this overarching immunity that, police officers have, that allow them to be able to operate with their biases and with their prejudices, and to target our communities and really, really devastate families and individuals.
And so we picked these two stories because they are timely and because they need attention, but they also provide food for thought. So I'm going to give you two different ways to do this. You can go to fairfightinitiative.org. You can click on the education section at the top and scroll down to systemic racism, or go directly to the URL, which is fairfightinitiative.org/systemic-racism. And this is clearly, this phenomenon, these two events, two stars in a constellation of criminal injustice and systemic racism, tie neatly through a diagram and an explanation that we have on our site that you can read for yourself. And it starts, it doesn't start with, but what feeds into this system of systemic racism is individual racism, right? So we have former Chief Sam Dobbins here with grotesque individual racism against Black people that he is ultimately allowed to weaponize into institutional racism by climbing the ranks and becoming the chief of police. We have a system, Linda, that not only allows for this, but has clearly, in this case of the Lexington, Mississippi Police Department, rewarded this type of behavior.
Exactly. And that's the thing with when you're tying it in with the individual and the institutional. It's because you have these people who have been raised in a system and an environment that promotes and support the thinking of the other, of being less than, of being not privileged enough to be able to be afforded equal justice. Actually, not even being able to say, that they are not even worthy of it, right? Sure. And so you bring that into the places of power that you now occupy. And of course, then you influence the culture of your departments and of your different systems that you put into place. You make sure that bias is embedded, and it just permeates everything from housing to education to the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Yes, and certainly in the case of law enforcement. But if you want to see an example of how institutional racism has really been at work, just go back to the January 6th hearings, right? So we have the individual racism of Sam Dobbins, where the racism that a person feels and the way that racism influences how they treat others is weaponized into institutional racism, where not only he is rewarded for this type of behavior to climb the ranks, but then he gets to make the rules. Mm-hmm. Well, if you need a 400-year example of that, come on. Let me just point back to the halls of Congress, where institutional racism not just seeps into society in this case, right? It's the entire groundwork upon which the society has been built, right? The rules, the laws, the guiding principles that inherently favor white people all the way back to the beginning, right? I mean, just go back and read that 3/5 compromise where, owned slaves only count as 60% of a person. Favor white people over everybody else, right?
Including women. right?
Absolutely, including women,
everybody
right?
else.
Who also did not have the right to vote.
It was the
before
land-owning white male, right?
and only them.
Exactly.
And you still see this 400 years later when we deliberate through an attempt to overthrow this very system, right? And so this is a group of people that tried to overthrow this system, in part, I would argue, because they see that it's no longer working in the way they think it was intended for their benefit, right? And so that they use violent means to try and wrest it back, right? But even when that is so bare in front of us, we still sort of tut through these hearings to say, oh, well, we need to protect the powerful people because they get special rules. And, we don't need to bother Mike Pence because he's out pretending like he might be president one day. And that's very important for his, there was one line, and I would leave this institutional racism with this line. And if you go back and watch the most recent hearing, Eugene Scalia, who was Secretary of Labor and a bit player in this whole January 6th saga, his testimony got aired in just a snippet during the hearing. He is, of course, the son of Antonin Scalia, who is the author of some of the most regressive Supreme Court opinions of the last 50 years. Of course, rises to power largely because of who his father was, becomes the Secretary of Labor under Donald Trump, and testifies to the committee that he tried to invoke the 25th Amendment. And then they asked, well, when it didn't work, why didn't you just resign? And he said, and it will sit with me forever, because then I would have been powerless to do something. Wow. And on its face, that sounds like something virtuous. But what you're really getting at there is people like Eugene Scalia's worst nightmare, right? Suddenly I wouldn't have any power. And in the midst of all of the other earth-shattering revelations that have come out in the January 6th hearings, I just go back to that one thing that he said. Well, why didn't you do something, virtuous? Why didn't you actually do something of, a moral standard? Because then I would have been powerless.
Yeah. And at the very core of it, Dave, you hit it right there. It's the unhealthy and erroneous idea that in order to be, to have worth of, that this system has to have this power over others, to have this level that says that I'm above you and I have the power to do whatever I want to your life. And I will not relinquish that power. I will have it in every aspect of your life. And you will just live with it. This is what it is. This is what it is. This is my worth. This is who we are. Right. And
then imagine what people with bear spray and metal rods and clubs think when they're confronted with the idea that they really don't have any power. Yeah. And now they're being asked to share that power inclusively with people who they are individually racist against.
Yeah. Right? Who they have been conditioned to believe have no place and no worth in this society. Yeah, and that's really sad. And we've got to get past it. We've got to keep telling them, stop me if you've heard this before, but we're not going to stop until everybody's heard it, huh?
The Fair Fight Initiative podcast is a production of the Fair Fight Initiative.
Founded in 2017, the Fair Fight Initiative is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to crowdsourcing litigation, which advocates for equal treatment under the law and confronts systemic racism.
We believe that justice crowdsourced is justice delivered.
Crowdsourcing resources from our contributors, we're able to finance the litigation no attorneys will take because of the overwhelming upfront cost to seek justice in our legal system.
And you can learn more about our mission and to contribute at fairfightinitiative.org.